All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation down here. So I was starting to think about what to talk about. For whatever reason, I said, let's just spend most of the time on kochia. Always a problem, right? Particularly in no-till. But we've had some new resistance with kochia, and some of you may be dealing with this yourselves and certainly heard us talk about it. We've had about 2 years to really focus on group 14 resistance in kochia. So I really want to spend a lot of time sharing what we've learned about that new type of resistance and kind of showing our struggles, at least that we can map within North Dakota. So first, I didn't check this with anyone. Hopefully there is sound to the computer. If not, then this will just be a quick silence here.
Farmers out in the fields this week and are finding a tough weed, they say, during this 2023 harvest.
No.
Some farmers say the weed kochia has been bad this year and believe it's going to get worse in the future.
All right. People in the front row got to hear that one, so I couldn't find the speaker in time for my mic. But we always have a weed of the year that we put in our North Dakota State weed guide. And this was a news clip actually from Fargo, and she said it was kochia. So I've seen this clip 100 times now, and I like to look at the fear in her eyes when she sees that word come across the teleprompter screen. But someone shared that with me. That was actually September of 23, and I find inspiration in the weirdest of places. And you can make a kochia pet. So this is what I did last winter. So anytime talking kochia, just kind of want to show this, make sure everyone's still awake after lunch. Looks like a pretty good lunch for everyone to have. Doesn't get very big when you use a clay-based medium like that, but you can have it reproduce and go to seed. So, for a no-till situation, a lot of the focus that we have on kochia might be that burned down prior to planting in the spring. So historically, here's a lot of what we focused on within North Dakota as far as products. You guys probably have a few more products we don't have available when you cross the border. But in general, a historical look, a lot of use on glyphosate or Roundup. Group 2 herbicides, use those a lot in small grains. Group 4, main focus 2,4-D, hasn't been a main focus for us for 40 or so years now. But when 2,4-D first kind of came out, was very effective on kochia back then. Dicamba, some increasing pockets of resistance for us, and then starine or fluroxapyr. I'll show some data that we're seeing up in our neck of the woods on that product. And then the group 14s have been a real big point of emphasis for us, particularly ahead of all the different broadleaf crops that we grow. And so that's not a fully comprehensive list, but a lot of the burn down products we might rely on, AIM, Sharpen probably being the big two. Residual, these sulfentrazone, so Spartan Authority products and Valor, a lot of utility of those for the past several years. And then within soybean, the diphenyl ethers, Flexstar, Blazer, Cobra, those burning type products. But we have group 14 resistance. So that far right column, all those products, that's what I want to spend some time going through first part of my talk here this afternoon. So kind of a historical perspective, and historical really means the last 2 years. When we first found group 14 resistance, up here near Minot was one of our first populations, and then down here near Mandan were two of the first ones that we found. Through greenhouse testing is how we confirmed group 14 resistance. Throughout the timeline in the last 18 to 24 months, we have found that it is target site resistance, which confers a high level of resistance. I'll show some pictures on that. But what that means for us from a documentation standpoint is we were able to find the mutation. Actually, I was working with BASF, a group of theirs in Germany, found the mutation, and we developed a quick assay to test for that resistance. So within our state, we do have a program where you can take 2 leaves of kochia, send it into a lab that's based on campus, and get confirmation within a week of group 14 resistance. It is available. I think the price was about $135. Don't quote me on that. But outside of our state lines, you can get it tested as well. If you're interested, I can get you that information, maybe onto the listserv. If anyone's really interested, we can send that out later. But we can test just 2 leaves, stick it in an envelope, send it to a lab on campus, know if you have group 14 resistance. So what this has done for us is basically allowed us to get a better idea of where we have group 14 resistant kochia across the state. That is over half the counties. Quite honestly, the white counties we haven't received samples from. So we probably do have some populations in every county, but it isn't every population within a county. Just kind of showing where we have found these types of resistances. So if you have not heard us talk about this, this is why I wanted to kind of get everyone up to the same speed here, what we were talking about when we look at group 14 resistance. So in the first research we did, this is AIM, so carfentrazone. We've relied on that a lot in the Spartan Charge type product ahead of sunflowers. Far left is a susceptible population, and then 4 different populations at the time we suspected resistance have now confirmed, just different townships there on the bottom. 1x rate is up front, 1 ounce of AIM, and then 2x behind it. 7 days after treatment, basically we killed all the susceptibles, very rapid regrowth on the resistant populations. Same thing with Sharpen, maybe a little bit more foliar activity compared to AIM in this situation, but same populations, same setup, 1 ounce of Sharpen here, 2 ounces of Sharpen in the back, very rapid regrowth from those burned down group 14 products. So the early work that we were doing is how high can we go with some of these products? To figure out, is this target site mutation or metabolic type of resistance? AIM up to 16 ounces on the far right, susceptible up front, dead at every rate. In the back, 16 ounces of AIM. A pint of AIM was not touching these populations. We went higher. The bottom 2 rows here are susceptible populations. The top 2 are resistant. This gold box is around 1 ounce of Sharpen. Then we have 3 ounces, 10, 31, 100 ounces of Sharpen. This picture, we did have survivors at basically a quart of Sharpen per acre. We did have some survive 100 ounces per acre. So think about what you might spend on an ounce of Sharpen, multiply that by 100, and you can still not kill kochia. So very concerning for us from the burn down situation when we have this type of resistance. But what's interesting is those soybean post-emergence products did provide control. So here's a resistant population, that's AIM in the back, Flexstar in this case in the front, and we were getting control. This was at first puzzling to us because when we look for group 14 resistance in water hemp or Palmer amaranth, the pigweeds, we find resistance by Flexstar failing us. In this case, we were finding resistance in kochia with our burn down products, and our products like Flexstar were still providing some control. So you already ate, so I can't hold that against you. We're not going to memorize structures here, but these are all the different group 14 chemistries and their structures. Main reason I put this up here is we have different chemical families. And this kind of aqua blue type color in the middle, that's our diphenyl ethers, that's our Cobra Flexstar Blazer. It's going to become important when I show a bunch of different chemistry utilized in the next couple slides. So we looked at, whatever it is, 9 different active ingredients within the group 14s. From a post-emergent standpoint, here's a susceptible population. That gold rectangle object there on the bottom, that's our first rep. It becomes more important on the resistant population. But basically, every group 14 product tested, controlled, susceptible population. Resistant population, this is just one of them from the Minot area. No herbicide in that bottom left. Then we have Blazer, Flexstar, and Cobra, our soybean products. Then actually from a foliar standpoint, we did spray Spartan and Valor, sulfentrazone and flumioxazin. Actually getting some level of suppression and burning foliar from those 2 products that we typically rely on from a residual standpoint. These back 4, that's Sharpen, Reviton, Vita, and then AIM, some more of those burn down type products, and basically complete resistance to the 1x rate of those products. Looking at the range that we saw of control across 5 different populations, the products on the bottom are the same that we had in the picture before. Just these dots are the range that we saw from across 5 populations. So this far left is our Ultra Blazer, all basically 95 to 100% control. Flexstar, a little bit wider range. Cobra is the one soybean foliar product we saw that did have less control compared to the other 2. So 80 to 95% essentially when we compared all populations. Then Valor and Spartans over here on the far right, we got about 70% control. Valor less, and then basically 10 to 30% failure from our eyes in the field of the burn down products. So putting this kind of back into perspective, if we have basically now For us, glyphosate resistance, pretty ingrained. I'm guessing the same thing down here. Some of our group 4s, we have some different levels of resistance, and now group 14. So again, we just want to take kind of a historical perspective for us from the spring burn down market. What have we had and what's still effective that's left? So this is some of our more important minor crops. So it's canola, sunflower and safflower there in the top middle, flax, chickpea, lentil, dry pea, going around the horn there. If we had glyphosate still working and no group 14 resistance, plenty of options for any crop really. Take away glyphosate and add on that group 14 resistance that's pretty widespread to us now. Canola, a couple options, basically Liberty and Gramoxone. Sunflower, safflower, Gramoxone. Flax, Callisto if you want to go that route. Chickpea, lentil, dry pea. Basically from a spring burn down perspective of what we're comfortable with, 90% or better control, a lot of reliance on paraquat, which is still very effective on these populations. I know some people choose not to use that chemistry for some of the issues that can come along with it, but still a very effective product on these group 14 resistant populations. Major crops, corn, soybean, small grains, just kind of a lot more options. Add on glyphosate group 14. Small grains, basically paraquat and dicamba from the labeled stuff that we use in our spring seeded small grains. Again, kind of a reliance on Gramoxone, Metribuzin. This year at least, take out this bottom line. And then corn is still pretty flush with options. So corn from a burn down standpoint, probably our best crop. I'll show some data in crop. Corn and small grains are still pretty well situated from an in crop option. This was if we had dicamba resistance, skip through that. So that's kind of the burn down situation. What about soil residual activity? So we did take a look at the two main products we're going to rely on, sulfentrazone or Spartan, Authority, and then flumioxazin, which is Valor. Apologize, I must have stolen this slide from a Canadian talk, but this is 4 and 8 fluid ounces of straight Spartan. We chose our 1 and 2x rate, and this is 3 and 6 fluid ounces of Valor EZ. So basically a 1 and a 2x rate, 3 ounces for Valor, 4 for Spartan. We'll keep that in mind. Susceptible population. So basically, on this slide, again, the gold box up front, that's our first replicate. Susceptible population, SP4, for those up front who can read it, is 4, and then SP8 is 8 fluid ounces of Spartan, 3 and 6 of Valor, complete control of our susceptible population. One of our worst case populations for resistance from near Mandan, we basically had plenty of escapes at all rates of Spartan and Valor. We don't always see this, but kind of the worst case, we're even seeing plants come through those rates of these group 14 residuals. Well, that's a different red dot, so sorry, I must have stolen this from a webinar I gave. Follow this red dot, if that makes sense. So essentially, what we have on the red dot on the bottom here, this is non-treated, 7 different populations. Looks like I'm pretty consistent with the last time I gave it. We'll do that dot. Spartan is that middle block, and then Valor is the very top block there. What we have on the very top, I'll take back over here, is 7 different populations that correspond to the right here. Basically different townships we collected populations from. This is just a 1x rate, so it's 4 ounces of Spartan, 3 ounces of Valor. The far right column is our susceptible. So basically, complete control with Spartan, 1 plant escaped Valor from that susceptible population. On the top, basically every population, we had plenty of escapes from Valor or flumioxazin. Looks pretty similar to what we're seeing on the non-treated. Spartan, sulfentrazone, a lot more variable, and my other laser spent time on these 2 populations. Columns 5 and 6, that's 2 different populations from near Mohall area, north central part of the state. Population 6, plenty of escapes. Population 5, 1 or 2 small ones coming through, but overall still provides good control. So I continue to point this out to our folks because it seems like flumioxazin, we've relied a lot on that product for fall, residual into the spring. Not as consistent for control. As sulfentrazone, it seems to be a population by population variability. So we still have some more work to do of why there's these differences for sulfentrazone. But the main point here is we can get control on some populations, others we're going to see that product slip as well. This was, yeah, so I think that's George back there. Question was that fall applied? That was in the greenhouse, basically seed, and we applied it directly onto the seed. So greenhouse, just comparing populations. I will show some field data from fall applications here coming up. Before I get to that though, weed science can be doom and gloom, so I want to show what still works. We do still have some options. So for us, our starting point, glyphosate resistance, and for many now, group 14. If you have our worst case population we found is glyphosate on group 2, of course, for us, 2,4-D and dicamba resistance, and group 14 was our worst population we're working with. And what still works for us, the photosystem inhibitors. Group 5, that's atrazine, metribuzin. Group 6, bromoxynil, we use in small grains. 22 is paraquat. So a couple different options, certainly in our major crops. The group 27 is all still very effective, work better with a group 5 or a group 6. And we'll go through some data on some of those combinations. Have not found glufosinate resistance yet, still holds up, but everyone kind of knows that you need the right weather conditions for best performance, and heat, sunlight, and humidity are the three that we certainly don't always get in the western parts of our state. Same thing down here. This question mark next to group 3, we have not seen any differences in response from these populations compared to others of things like sonalan, prowl, treflan. Some folks have different comfortability levels of treflan versus sonalan within our state. And so those are still responding the same. Maybe not the best product for kochia, but see no difference on these resistant populations. I'll show some data on out of the group 15 products, pyroxasulfone, that's Zidua, Anthem Flex. We're seeing a lot better utility of that product from a fall application than a spring application. Similar to what we've used for fall applications of Valor, get that winter snow melt, rainfall, and really get that product where it needs to be within the soil come kochia germination in the spring. And this is no-till, so we're going to pretend like that bottom line doesn't exist because it sounds like, well, I'm already married and I don't want to be part of that dream. So we're going to ignore that bottom one. Fall applications, something that we've talked about for over a decade now, has been a core foundation for many of us in no-till within North Dakota for kochia control in the spring. Show this picture. This is, I always say this is kind of a best case scenario from a fall application of, in this case, Valor plus metribuzin. This picture was taken in early June. Very rarely will you see the left side of this screen with very good kochia control that late into the spring. We can sometimes get near complete control throughout mid-May to late May. Some years it's maybe 30 to 50%. Much like any time we put a residual herbicide in the spring, same thing in the fall, environmental variability and issues can affect performance. But this picture, just a nice line, very effective control on the left side of the screen from a fall application. That right side of the screen, all the green there is basically kochia. From a fall application standpoint, and I apologize, this will be one more greenhouse picture, but showing some differences. I got the order of those two slides mixed up from what I wanted. So the other thing that we've been looking at, I mentioned we're looking a lot more at pyroxasulfone, so Zidua, also an Anthem Flex. In the spring for us, particularly in no-till, it hasn't been the best product. We typically need half-inch of rainfall or more. We don't always get that in our springs. And we can get some tie-up on residue. So we've had some, if we go into clay soil, get an inch of rainfall, it's been tilled, we can get very good kochia control of pyroxasulfone. Has been a bit different story for us in no-till. We're looking at it more in the fall. So we know active ingredient-wise, it can be very impactful, effective on kochia. Flumioxazin, again, kind of showed data related to that. This particular slide, the middle part, is two resistant populations. I keep moving them around just to make sure everyone is still awake. Susceptible on the top and on the bottom. What we wanted to look at is some more data on pyroxasulfone. Far right column, this is fierce, so the premix of Valor and Zidua, or I should say of flumioxazin and pyroxasulfone. Still some escapes, but overall much better control than either product alone. So even though we do have resistance to the group 14 products of flumioxazin, it is bringing something to the table compared to pyroxasulfone alone. So we are taking a closer look at some of these pre-mixtures and tank mixtures from a fall standpoint. This was just a comparison of populations in the greenhouse. So a few treatments from the fall. So this is some research from Brian Jenks, who's based out of Minot. Treatments were applied mid-October of 2022. This was rated blue bars are May 23rd, orange bars are June 6th of 2023. From left to right here, we have, again, fall application of Fierce, 6 ounces, Valor EZ at 3, Valor plus 1/3 pound of metribuzin, 4 ounces of Spartan, Spartan plus metribuzin, metribuzin by itself on the far right. So just kind of going now across an order, that Fierce fall application, 60 to 70%, likely some group 14 resistance in this population because it is on that research station. Valor flumioxazin started at about 50 down to about 40%. Mixing in metribuzin up close to 90, kind of the same thing with Spartan plus metribuzin or even metribuzin by itself. Again, this is a 1/3 pound active here, getting near 90% control. And then that Spartan or sulfentrazone started 60, went down to about 40. So we've typically, before group 14 resistance, liked the flumioxazin type products, Valor, because it's less water soluble than Spartan or sulfentrazone. What we have seen in very wet winters is things like sulfentrazone that's very water soluble may give us less control in the spring. This year, this research trial, they were about even come spring. But metribuzin was looking good for us in the fall. I'm going to talk a lot about metribuzin coming up. Before I get there, though, another trial from Brian Jenks, looking, in this case, Anthem Flex. Again, the main active ingredient carrying the load here is pyroxasulfone, or Zidua, but Anthem Flex formulation. Fall applications, middle of October 23. This was late June of 24, so about as long as we could take a research trial out and look at some differences. Green bars are kosher, so we have 3, 4, and 6 ounces of Anthem Flex. This far right column is 3.5 ounces of Anthem Flex plus 1/3 pound of metribuzin. So we did see a stepwise increase as the rate went up from 50% to 90% on kosher as we went from 3 to 6 ounces. Again, this is late June. So honestly, 92% control of kosher in late June is pretty darn good from a fall application. At the time, Brian had put some economics behind this. I have not tracked economics throughout the winter, but Anthem can be, at least at the time, was relatively expensive compared to some other options. So Brian always likes to kind of lower the rates a little bit and tank mix things to make it more economical. So that's what this far right column is. It's 3.5 ounces of Anthem Flex plus metribuzin, a little bit cheaper than that 6 ounce rate of Anthem Flex, plus better for resistance management. 90% control. For those who do have green foxtail, that's our gold bar, and we were getting probably, it followed along pretty well, green foxtail control with kosher. So we've actually started looking, or we started looking at pyroxasulfone in the fall for wild oat control. We're also looking at it for foxtail control now, or pigeon grass, because of some of our resistance issues. But the main focus here is kosher, getting some good control on that weed as well. The other thing we've been looking at a little bit, did not repeat this last year. In fact, this is actually a couple years old now, but looking at a potential combination of cereal rye, so cover crop, plus herbicide for kosher control in the spring. So just relying or trying not to rely just on chemistry. So what we're looking at now on this chart is this is actually plants per square foot, so it's not a percent control level. Non-treated on the left, just a fall application mid-October of Spartan or sulfentrazone. Middle bar is Valor, flumioxazin. Next to that is the combination of we planted rye early September, applied Valor mid-October, and the far right there is just rye by itself. For those who can see the numbers up top, that's a percent reduction in density of kochia. So compared to doing nothing, this particular year, sulfentrazone reduced kochia 10% come May 23rd. Flumioxazin reduced the density 37%. Rye was 60% reduction just by planting rye and spraying nothing. But that combination with Valor mid-October gave us 73% reduction in kochia. So for those who are looking at rye for weed suppression, it is one of our better things to use for kochia if you want to go that route rather than chemistry. But we were trying to say, what if we put together something like a group 14 that we may burn some of the rye leaves when we apply it, but it will survive, so we get some cover crop plus residual chemistry. Was basically the idea there. And then this was just essentially percent ground cover. Main thing here is showing that we did not really have much of a reduction, 2%, 3% reduction in ground cover by that Valor plus rye. So really just showing, did we burn some leaves of rye in the fall? Yes. Did it show up in the spring? No. So something we need to repeat a few more times, but certainly looking very promising for us for those who do like to have cover crops, particularly rye. Back into some more burn down products. So now I believe this and the rest of the Minot focused slides I'll be sharing are on a group 14 resistant population. We want to show a few things that Brian's looking at now that he has that type of population on the farm. Different products on the left here, non-treated, just a mixture of glyphosate and Spartan Charge was very popular for a while, for many years for us for sunflowers. Liberty, glufosinate, we don't recommend that in a burn down situation just because you need that heat and humidity and sunlight. Don't always get that when we're applying our burn down products. Brian's looking a lot at Reglone, which is diquat, similar to paraquat or gramoxone, but not quite as good from a weed control perspective. And then because questions keep coming into us, we did look at Elevore, Haloxafen, and then Pixaro, which is fluroxapyr, styrene, and Elevore. Kochia control early and late June from a May 30th application, so essentially 1 week and 4 weeks later. Glyphosate Spartan Charge not working on that station too much anymore, 50% control. In this case, did get excellent control from glufosinate. May 30th was pretty hot and humid for us this past year. And then paraquat also very good. Elevore by itself about 40% control. And this Pixaro combination about 70% control for us. And I'll show some in-crop data for styrene-based, fluroxapyr-based products. Seems for us, no matter the research station, no matter the field we go to, 70% control is what we get out of fluroxapyr anymore by itself. So a good starting product, but we're not seeing that being a complete kochia product for us anymore. From a spring residual standpoint, I want to show a few slides here. So a lot more focus on metribuzin, not just in our geography, but nationally. Get an older product, still very effective. For us, still very effective on kochia. For those who deal with water hemp, very effective on water hemp. For those in some of the I states that deal with metabolic resistance in water hemp, it's still very effective on those populations. So in case you're wondering why weed scientists are spending a lot of time talking about metribuzin, it's still very effective for us. We don't really want to burn it out, but it's still a great product. And I believe I have this slide in here. In general, newer soybean varieties don't have some of the sensitivity issues that older soybean varieties did. So a lot of folks, maybe in the 80s and early 90s, had some severe metribuzin injury on soybeans. Very few varieties are that sensitive, but just certainly focusing on not just metribuzin, but higher rates because of the utility. So that's a long-winded setup to say many of our different research stations, we have a similar set of treatments. Main thing we're looking at is metribuzin at 1/4 and 1/2 pound active. Rates of a dry product that's 5 1/3, and then close to 11 ounces of a 75 DF. And then sulfentrazone, so 4 and 8 fluid ounces of a Spartan type product. In every combination. So about 8 different treatments. Going to show the kochia data first, and we'll show some other weeds a little bit later on. Kochia, we had at 2 locations this year. We had over in Hettinger, where we do not have a group 14 resistant population. And then up here in Carrington, where there is group 14 resistance in the county. Haven't quite confirmed it on the farm, but we should go back to this research trial and collect some leaves. So looking at all the different combinations, gold bar, Hettinger, southwest North Dakota. Green bar, Carrington. 1 and 2x rated metribuzin, so 1/4 and half-pound active, 1 and 2x rate of sulfentrazone. This is a mistake here. This is actually a 1x and a 1x, that tank mix, and then 2x metribuzin, 1x sulfentrazone, the inverse, and then the high rate of both. In general, pretty similar control with the 1 and the 2x rate of metribuzin. So not too much of a stark difference between a quarter and a half pound active ingredient. And Hettinger just about 4, but they were both about 80%, about 10% better control with the higher rate. And Carrington, Hettinger, sulfentrazone, again about 80% control regardless of rate. And this is 6 weeks after planting, spring application. Carrington, like I said, we have not confirmed group 14 resistance, but basically no control out of sulfentrazone by itself. So probably there in that research trial. Then the combinations, somewhere around 75 to 80%, no matter which way we spun it, until we got to the high rate of each, and then 90 to 100% control of kochia 6 weeks after planting. Complete control 6 weeks after planting would make us pretty happy. Okay, I did have some foxtail. So foxtail, pigeon grass, if you deal with it. We had some in Minot, which are the yellow bars, and that was yellow foxtail. We had some in Hettinger, green bars, that's green foxtail. So we often talk about metribuzin and sulfentrazone as broadleaf products, and that's their main market. We don't talk enough about how metribuzin can have activity on some grasses. So in this case, that quarter pound active, about 40% up to 85% control of yellow foxtail and Minot, about 75 to 80% control on green foxtail and Hettinger. Sulfentrazone, again, Minot 10 to 40% from based on the rate, which every time I've applied sulfentrazone or Spartan Authority products, that's about what I expect on foxtails, pigeon grasses, no matter the species, panicum species as well. So we don't call it a grass product, but as we're seeing resistance to our post-emergence small grain products for our Group 1 and Group 2 chemistry, we need to start looking at kind of these complex tank mixtures to get better, complete foxtail control. And then higher rates of each of these tank mixes, we did get close to 90% control 6 weeks after planting. So not just a kochia type thing, but we can get these grasses somewhat controlled as well. Text-heavy slide, but basically a summary of what we saw across 8 different sites for soybean crop response. Never saw sulfentrazone injury is the second bullet point here. The high rate of metribuzin, again, in this case, our high rate is a half pound active, almost 11 ounces of a dry Sencor type product. 2 cases we saw some injury. It was less than 10% crop response. We had a site over in Minnesota that was a sandy loam, pH of 8.2, and we got 8 inches of rain within the first 3 weeks of planting. So that type of soil with a lot of rainfall, we got 10% injury. And that's all we saw at the high rate. Minot, not quite as much rain, a little bit lower pH. I believe that was a sandy loam there as well. High rate, we saw some injury there. Main thing is, did not see any yield differences come the end of the year. So 2 cases of injury, no yield differences with one exception at our Fargo location, which was a clay, pH of 8, 6 inches of rain within the first 3 weeks, and standing water for all 3 weeks. The tank mix, the high rate of both, we did see a reduction in yield. So if you're thinking about maybe using those lower rates, maybe a quarter pound active for many of our people in our geography is higher than we're used to using. Pretty safe, and really in these extreme wet environments is where we saw some injury, some crop response, and we are repeating this next year, and I doubt we'll get 8 inches of rain again, except for I just said it out loud, so now we probably will. A couple more things on kochia. The question we're getting a lot is, particularly with XtendiMax and Ingenia kind of off the market this year, if we're looking at the Enlist system, a lot of good data on other weeds, and I'll show some water hemp data of a tank mix of glufosinate and 2,4-D looking better together on a lot of our broadleaf weeds. Question always comes up about kochia. And so we have a couple data points throughout the year. I'm going to show this trial from this past year. This is Mike Osley, who's at Carrington, looking at different combinations within Enlist soybean. And I stole this directly from him, so I do apologize for the small text. But what we're looking at is Liberty. In this case, we use the 280 formulation plus AMS, Liberty Enlist 1, Liberty Enlist 1 in crop oil, Liberty Enlist 1 in a high surfactant crop oil, and then a couple combinations, in this case with dual Magnum, so it's still Liberty Enlist 1 dual, and then with Roundup, and then kind of everything together, Liberty Enlist Roundup dual Magnum. At 14 days, well, we'll start here on this column next to that. Complete control in every situation when we had a pre, in this case it was Broadax. So that was, in this case, sulfentrazone metolachlor. Worked very well at this site location from a residual standpoint on kochia, where we got 4 inches of rain after planting. Where we did not have a pre, so just planted, and then came back to control kochia. Main things I want to highlight: glufosinate by itself, about 84% control. Tank mix with Enlist 1, 90, and then basically between 90 and 95, depending on the exact combination, at 14 days after treatment. By 28 days after treatment, glufosinate 63% control, Liberty glufosinate plus Enlist 1 60% control. So we're not seeing this synergistic response of glufosinate and 2,4-D on kochia. And it goes back to something I said towards the beginning. For us at least, all the populations that we tend to work with, 2,4-D has not been the most effective product for us for a couple of decades now. You're going to kill some plants, maybe overall 10 to 30% control, but we're not seeing that synergistic reaction with glufosinate. Different for water hemp and other broadleaf weeds, and I'll show you some water hemp data at the very end. A couple of notes on sunflowers. We went through all kinds of different burn down scenarios that we can go through with glyphosate group 14. So if you don't have that group 14 resistance, still a pretty heavy reliance on sulfentrazone. Shared some of the data of pyroxasulfone. We're getting maybe some better control from a fall application than spring. And then whatever your comfort level with the group 3s are, not going to change with different populations. The sulfentrazone piece is what really changes with resistance. So another slide from Brian Jenks here. This is just basically data lifted out of our weed control guide of all the different products that are labeled pre-emergence or pre-plant incorporated for sunflower, and the range of what we've seen in research over the years of how they work. And in general, it has been a heavy reliance forever on these sulfentrazone products, but starting to look at, for some of us, either more reliance on Prowl H2O type products and no-till. There are some folks trying the granules of Treflan and Solan in the fall again for no-till, but those have always been maybe 70% control. Just some issues with distribution of the granules and then relying on winter precipitation. A couple slides on kochia and small grain, then I swear I'm almost done with kochia. And we'll talk some water hemp. Just wanted to point out, so this is, again, some research from, this one was from Minot, just showing, this was no names up here on the slide, but basically a lot of different pre-mixtures on the market for kochia control and small grains or other weeds as well. When fluroxapyr or starine is the primary product to control kochia, we just are always around that 70% control. That doesn't matter which corner of the state we're applying these trials in. It's always about 70% with the maximum labeled rate of fluroxapyr. So that's certainly a key component for us. But we're really relying a lot more on these bromoxynil plus group 27 products, and then we want some fluroxapyr on top of that. So a data slide here from Kirk Hallett. This was actually near Valley City, North Dakota. And so 4 different colored bars from left to right within each grouping here is water hemp, lamb's quarters, yellow is ragweed, and orange is kochia. So bromoxynil by itself, a very big range depending on the weed. Not a pigweed product, looked pretty good on lamb's quarters, 50 to 60% on kochia and ragweed. Tolvera is a new product from Corteva. So we were talking about this a lot. It's a group 6 plus 27. The 27 component does have grass activity, so primarily targeting foxtails. Then Husky, Talinor. In this case, for most of the broadleaf weeds, very similar. Kochia, we're at, with those products alone, about 80% control. If we throw on some fluroxapyr, we do get up to complete control or near complete control. So 3 effective active ingredients. From a long-term resistance management standpoint, it makes me a little bit nervous that it's a lot of reliance on group 627 and fluroxapyr, but that's what's working really well for us right now within small grains. This is just, I'm going to skip through this because the text is really small. Similar set of data from Hettinger. Similar set of responses where fluroxapyr alone, 70%. Some more complex tank mixtures, we can get near complete control. Any kochia questions? Let me do a time check while we're working on this. Before about 10 minutes on pigweeds. Yes, sir.
I understand the DNA lab in Fargo can't tell the difference genetically between, say, an AIM-resistant kochia and a Spartan or a Valor-resistant kochia pre-applied. Do you think that we just don't we're not seeing the genetic differences yet, or is that a physiological thing, or how do you think this is going to develop? Are we going to see group 14s straight across the board all at once, or are they going to, is this differences in group 14 is going to be a long-term deal?
Yep, so summarize, so this lab test I talked about in Fargo, we can tell if we have group 14 resistance, basically showed that sulfentrazone might be a little bit more variable, we're unsure. How do we think it's going to develop? So, get a little bit into some more detail here, but this is the stuff that really gets, excited is not the right word because it's bad for us, right? But from a scientific standpoint, it's kind of neat. So, we do know it's a target site. There are 3 different amino acid substitutions. So basically we can get 3 different types of mutations at the same location on the DNA of kochia. What we know is if you have any of those mutations, what I showed for the burn down, the AIMs, the sharpens, consistent. Every group 14 resistant population we test has a mutation within that part of the DNA and the exact same response to those burn down products. And to flumioxazin. So we've seen that, Valor products, we've seen that consistency. The sulfentrazone variability, my working theory, and this is where we still have some more research to do, is within a population you could have all 3 amino acid substitutions possibly within the same plant, and that's why we're seeing some populations survive sulfentrazone. If you only have one of those particular mutations, maybe that's where we're still getting good control. So how do I think it's going to develop? What we've seen is basically, how it developed for us is AIM or sharpen being used, phone calls on failure, and that's been consistent across every population. From a residual standpoint, it seems like the flumioxazin has been consistent as well. And those have been basically questions of I applied Valor in the fall, very disappointed with it, come springtime, and usually we can find resistance there. Sulfentrazone is one I don't have a good crystal ball on because we initially were looking for a mutation. We do have the DNA to see where the type of mutation across all those collections, but then we would need to basically get seed, which is what we don't have from all these tests, to go back and try and confirm why the difference in sulfentrazone. So, not the most clear or best answer maybe, because we don't have the best answer right now, but sulfentrazone is the one where I would keep an eye on it of may work for some of us, may not for others. Those other products has been consistent across populations. Yes, sir.
We do a lot of split applications. Is that chemistry where we put like a third in the fall and 2/3 in the spring? And we think that helps us. I haven't done a lot of testing on that. That's one. And number 2, years ago we looked at trying to use an inert granular to carry the residual products so we get down through the residue. Otherwise we get too much stuff on the residue. Is there any chance we got any of that coming down the pipe?
So as far as split applications of fall and spring, we haven't messed with that too much of taking a full labeled rate and breaking it out 1/3, 2/3 fall, spring, or vice versa. If you could tell me when it's going to rain, I can give you a better answer of how it's going to work. So it's a good way to hedge our bets. That's why we've had some of these products for a fall application, just to make sure we get a better chance of moisture, particularly West River for us. As far as, so basically putting it on different granules and applying it in the fall to try and get those granules through the residue, We don't have any direct research on that, but it would certainly make sense for me.
We used sand, it was
No.
really good with the DNA and then stuff with the DNA on board impregnation of sand.
Yep. So again, I think it would just come down to making sure even distribution. If that does help, then it's certainly going to give us a better chance of the group 3 DNAs. It's not the genetic DNA group 3s, dinitroanilins, getting that into the soil and working for us. So I'm for it.
Yeah, we get a lot more particles per square inch, that was our goal. Because our 10G in the US versus the 5G in Canada, there's quite a difference in how many square inches you spread the particles. And we were going like a fine sand, so we were getting about five times as many particles per square inch.
All right. Sounds like a good avenue of research. So to summarize, basically by impregnating a group 3 on something like sand, getting better coverage compared to like the 10G formulation, spreading that in the fall. So certainly something for us to look at, but sounds like it'd be a good avenue to get that on in the fall, particularly for no-till production. Barring any other hands, you've gotten to look at my North Dakota pigweeds. Not going to spend too much time on Palmer. Most of the rest of this is some data I've got on water hemp, all conducted in a no-till situation. So again, some of this will be chemistry heavy, but it is all in a no-till situation, which can have slight influence on how a residual product works. Before getting there, one of our biggest issues where we have water hemp and no-till is actually in the post-harvest of small grain. So for a lot of our heavy water hemp fields, we might get all the way through a wheat crop water hemp free. Harvest it, get a rain mid-August, and then we get a field full of 3-inch tall water hemp. Conventional till guys, they'll just go out and till a couple times, and that usually does a decent job depending on the type of tillage. I'll show some data from a burn down standpoint post-harvest in wheat. But the main thing I like to emphasize is this was a couple years ago, went out. This was a plant that germinated about the last week of August. Pulled this plant September 11th, threshed this, and got 88 seed out of that small plant. So my main standpoint or talking point here is, we can have a really good wheat crop, get some rain, get a field full of 3-inch water hemp, and go from one seed growing up into a female plant producing 88, will round up to 100 going back into the soil. So this is why for some of our situations we can have, again, a good year in small grains and then a disaster in the rotational crop next year. Because with water hemp, even though it was a late germinating parent plant, water hemp seed is really just conditioned to germinate whenever the hell it feels like it, when conditions are right. So this question has come up quite often of, well, this plant germinated in late August, so won't all these seed be a late summer, early fall? Nope. We can basically bring these into the lab or into the field, and they're going to germinate whenever the conditions are right. So kind of a downfall with water hemp, but that's why this post-harvest control is very important. Very important to our sugar beet growers, and so Tom Peters is our sugar beet weed scientist, and so he's put quite a bit of effort into different programs post-harvest in wheat. Main summary from this slide, it's just 3 different rating timings, bunch of different products, glyphosate at the very top, glyphosate 2,4-D, different combinations of glyphosate and Sharpen and Valor, so maybe some burn down plus residual, and then a couple of different ways to spray glyphosate and 2,4-D at the very bottom. So I'm going to show data later that 2,4-D is very effective on water hemp within soybean. When we get into a post-harvest situation, we have a mixture of some of those plants that germinate and are emerging late in the season, kind of a different set of environmental conditions, and we have quite a bit of plants that did get harvested with the combine, so regrowth from stumps. So in this post-harvest wheat situation, we were getting consistently about 60 to, by the end of the ratings, if we get things right, up to maybe 90% control out of glyphosate and 2,4-D on water hemp. Most consistent for us in this particular trial was basically mixtures of Sharpen or mixtures of Sharpen plus Valor. And so this could also, there's no paraquat in this trial. Paraquat is about liquid death on pigweeds. That's really basically the best pigweed herbicide we have, just can't use it in crop. So anything that's, in this case, a sharpen type product or a gramoxone type product, very effective in this post-harvest situation. Those products that are systemic take a little bit longer to work, like 2,4-D, similar with dicamba, distinct, that type. We don't ever quite get to that high level of control compared to the quick burning products in a post-harvest situation. So what about within crop? I want to show some residual data and then kind of a summary of 5 years of post-emergence applications within soybean. So to set up residuals within soybean, and this is all going to be water hemp data now, but basically from 2020 through 2023, if you did not want it to rain on your farm, you can invite me out there to put out a residual trial. 2023 was my most severe year, so we always talk about we want about a half inch of rainfall within the first 7 to 14 days after making a residual application. 2020 through 23, those 4 years, I could not buy a half inch within the first 2 weeks. 23, it took me up to 4 weeks to get 1 inch of rainfall, 10 different light rainfall events throughout that time. 24, this location I'll be showing, we got that first inch within 2 days. I had 3 new grad students start, told them this is about perfect, and then it kept raining. And then we were taking boats out to our trial, and we conducted every safety training NDSU has to offer. So I'm lucky they stayed. So that was a boring first 3 weeks for them, but plenty of rainfall for activation. So now, all of my questions were, is my product still there because it hasn't rained? To now, is my product still there because it rained too much? So this was May 15th, I think. May 10th, I was still fielding questions about weed control in a drought. And that quickly changed, certainly in our geography, and I'm guessing the same thing as we came south, eastern half of the state. So luckily, I had the same trial in both of those years. Again, this is in a no-till scenario. It's going to be 20 treatments, so it's a lot of bars. We're going to take a little bit of time to go through it. Various combinations. I'm just going to focus on trade names for the sake of time. So we basically made our own Fierce. We had Valor and Zidua. Surveil, which is Valor and first rate. Surveil plus Zidua. Fierce MTZ, Spartan, and then pre-emergent application of a half pound of dicamba. The main goal of this trial was looking at the 1/4 pound and a half pound of metribuzin. Put just a little asterisk next to Fierce MTZ. There is metribuzin within Fierce MTZ, but if you use a pint and a quarter, you don't have a 1/4 pound of metribuzin. So we spiked in additional metribuzin to get to our desired rates. So those products plus a 1/4 half pound of dicamba, of metribuzin, gets us to a pretty big, busy graph. So for those again up front or viewing this later, basically a 1/4 and a half pound of metribuzin is MTZ 1 and 2. Then from top to bottom on the last screen is left to right, the various combinations with individual active ingredients on the far right. 2023, 6 weeks after planting. Green box on top is all the best treatments at that rating date. Basically 85 to 96% control. Where we got the best control in the dry year, 6 weeks after planting, are basically where we had 3 effective active ingredients, or where we had maybe 1 or 2 effective active ingredients with a half pound of metribuzin. Metribuzin by itself, 30 to 70% control, depending on the rate. Individual active ingredients, basically 15 to 60% control. And so 15% control, that was Zidua or pyroxasulfone, dry year. 60% control was dicamba, dry year. So dicamba very water soluble, so looks a little bit better in a dry year. Zidua or pyroxasulfone needs a lot of water, so it doesn't look all that good in a dry year. This past year, with all that rainfall, it's more or less the same core of treatments that rose to the top 6 weeks after planting. Again, about 85 to, in this case, near complete control, where we had multiple effective active ingredients. Interestingly enough, the 1 and 2x rate of metribuzin still about, in this case, 30 and 80% rather than 30 and 70. But now we did have a switch when we looked at some of the active ingredients. So now Zidua Pyroxasulfone in 23 was 15%, 86% control in 24, the high rainfall environment, and dicamba went the other way. So point this out because we talked about effective, multiple effective active ingredients from a resistance management standpoint, but it can also be a weather management standpoint. So having those couple of treatments together or active ingredients together looked good in a dry year, looked good in a wet year. Relying on a single active, something like pyroxasulfone or dicamba, we were at the mercy of the weather. So it's going to depend basically on the chemistry as well, not just if it works on water hemp. And it's too late in my talk to go through chemistry. So basically was, if anyone's getting their phone out for a picture, you can look at it later, but this is just the water solubility of our most prominent soybean herbicides. The higher the number in this column, the more water soluble it is. And my main point for that is setting up the next slide that a lot of our premixtures like Fierce MTZ, we're going to have products that are low numbers, need water, high numbers, do better in low rainfall environments. So Valor, Metribuzin, Zidua, all on their own right, very effective on water hemp, but different water solubilities. So also a very good combination product to basically look good in this case for Valent across the whole U.S., whether it's dry or wet. So just kind of a little more background on why some of these premixtures are made and go together. Sometimes the answer is just chemistry. Last slide here, last little data set I want to show. Did go back for a 5-year period and looked at every time within our research in a no-till production site, in this case near Fargo, we sprayed glufosinate or Liberty, 2,4-D in the form of Enlist 1, the tank mix of that, or dicamba, on 3 to 4 inch tall water hemp. Ended up being over 500 times we did this over 5 years. Broke it out if we did nothing else but have a burn down to kill off whatever was existing, planted our soybean, let the water hemp get to 3 inches, that's about 300 times. Or if we had any sort of residual herbicide down and then let the water hemp get to 3 inches, that's about 200 times. That happened. And then I put these into a box and whisker plot. And so the number on top is the average control over 5 years of the product on the bottom. So the far left column here, 80% control. So out of all those times we sprayed glufosinate on 3 inch tall water hemp without a residual ahead of it, 80% control. These whiskers, the tails, are the minimum and maximum. So we could get 100% control out of glufosinate or as low as 40%. 2,4-D for us, Enlist 1, about 75%. That tank mix of glufosinate or Liberty and 2,4-D, 95% control, 80 to 100 was the range. And then on this population, at least, dicamba was a little bit worse for us than 2,4-D over the years. When we followed a pre, those average numbers all got higher. These whiskers or the tails all got tighter. And so rather than as low as 40% from glufosinate, looks like 85% was the lowest observation that we ever had. And then basically we were consistently complete control with the tank mix of glufosinate and Enlist 1 when following a residual herbicide. Water hemp only, I do need to go back and look at this on other things, like what about kochia, some of our other driver weeds. When we talk about that tank mix of glufosinate and Enlist 1 within crop on something like water hemp, that's where we do see the benefit of those two together, which again I mentioned earlier, we have not yet seen that on kochia, but I do need to repeat this exercise for other weeds. So that's all I wanted to present. George did say I've got a podcast, so if you're driving around bored, wanted to listen to some things about weeds, a couple other colleagues of mine. I always say there's an episode for everyone, but not every episode is for everyone. And we'll spend some time with people from the EPA talking about the herbicide strategy and Endangered Species Act. Snoozer, right? I find it interesting. We have a couple kochia, a couple no-till, a couple fall application. So we have it. The title should make sense. So if you want to just cruise through a couple, over 100 episodes in there now, something catches your eye, take a listen. If you don't like it, that's fine. Contact information, QR code should work. Checked it last week. If you're interested in an electronic version of our weed control guide, I know some NDSU ones in the back of the room there. Did I leave time for questions or did we take it all?
We got time for questions if anyone has them.
So no, it's pretty kochia and water hemp centric, but no-till production for me, that's phone calls I get.
Well, those are the main issues that we definitely see around here.
Joe, you never mentioned pursuit. I mean, you use it at all, or
Yeah.
how does it?
So the question was, I never mentioned pursuit. Are we using it at all? We don't use it a whole lot within North Dakota. Our maximum rate is 3 ounces, not 4, just because of the extra carryover concern. So, and we do have it out, particularly it probably gets the most use in Zidua Pro, and we have it in our trials. It's not going to touch for us, doesn't touch water hemp or kochia, but from a residual standpoint on many of our foxtail populations, pigeon grass, it's one of the best things we can do in soybeans. So we don't use it a whole lot. We tend to use, well, it's Beyond Extra now, Raptor, Beyond. We tend to use that more just because of the lower risk of carryover. So we use some, but lower rates than most.
Yeah, very good. If there's no more questions, let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.